Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast, friends. It's Kim Skarupski here looking at my friend, Dr. Brian Clyne. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Kim. Good to see you again.
Yes, again, you might want to check out episode number 191. Over 2 years ago, this episode dropped. It was one of our most popular episodes. Again, number 191. It's entitled Finding Focus, Collaborators, and Mentors for Accelerating Scholarly Productivity. Check it out. I promise you, you will find it a wonderful gem. Those of you who have not been listening for 5 years now to the Faculty Factory podcast, let me tell you who is Dr. Brian Clyne. He's a professor of emergency medicine at the Alpert Medical School of Brown University. He has served in numerous clinical, educational, and administrative leadership roles over the past 20 plus years. As vice chair for education, Dr. Clyne develops and supports programs across the continuum of learners from undergraduates all the way to faculty. He founded and directed Leadership in Healthcare, a master's level course for Alpert Medical School students. So he is a past chair of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine Faculty Development Committee, recipient of an Education Award, the Hal Jane Excellence in Education Award, graduate of Brown, Masters in Healthcare Leadership Program. He is an ACT leadership and performance coach. I would love to hear what's been going on in the 2+ years since we last talked, Brian.
Yeah, I know. I feel like it's been a busy 2.5 years. Probably the biggest change for me is I've become more active in the coaching space. So I do leadership and performance coaching, predominantly for healthcare professionals. And one of the areas that I feel like I've focused on is the newly transitioned leader. So people that are finding themselves in a new leadership role that, as I can, like, I've had some experience myself, like feeling underprepared for, or maybe put into something that you would like a little support to be successful within. And so that's been really interesting. And I feel like recently I've been seeing more and more early career physicians come to coaching, and there have been a few themes that I've noticed there. But yeah, so in addition to continuing to do education work and work with my department and residents and students, et cetera, it's been kind of the faculty coaching space that's been most active.
I love it. So what kinds of themes are coming up? What are you hearing? Are there common threads that you're seeing with these early career physicians? I'd be so curious because I too, I know you know now, am coaching, and it's so interesting. And I learned so much about not only myself, but about the future of our field and what are the current tensions and pressure points. And when I start to hear these commonalities, it kind of really clues me in to what's hot, what's new, what are people really, thinking about. So what are you finding and when you coach these early career physicians, Brian?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing is that the insight was that, boy, and more early career physicians are coming to coaching. I think maybe you can attest to this, that I think people often come to coaching at a certain point in their career. Maybe it's they're burned out and they want to address that, or maybe they're at more mid or senior level and they're trying to make a transition to, there's a certain stage of career that I feel like most people will seek out coaching. But increasingly, I've seen, like I said, early career physicians, and it's when I thought about it, I was like, well, this can be a very disorienting period. There's this excitement of starting your first real job post training, but there's also a lot of uncertainty, and I've found that these people need to rediscover themselves after being kind of spun around and spit out at the end of a very long journey. And so, yeah, and it's given me an opportunity to think about, like, kind of meet them where they are and reflect on where they are in their career. So you asked me about some themes. One of the themes that I have noticed is, the question is kind of, now what? And that's the first thing that I hear is, so many physicians have been following along a path, and there's clear punctuation marks and goalposts, and there was college, there was medical school, there's residency, and even during residency there are these clear kind of mile markers or milestones along the way, and people are often sprinting through these experiences, and suddenly they are, they reach the finish line, so to speak, and they're like, okay, well, what's the next thing? How do I get to the next stage? And so I guess the big topic that comes up in coaching is like, how do I set goals that are more internally
Mm.
driven, and not, we've spent so much time in our medical career responding to external expectations and goalposts, so to speak. And now it's my turn to figure out, like, where is the next goalpost? Because you get in this, I kind of have this image of like a very kind of murky, foggy tunnel, and there's no real clear, exit point, and the lighting's not good, and I can't really see the mile markers. So working with people as a coach it's been really interesting to have these conversations with junior faculty members, newly transitioned physicians, around like, how do I want to create those mile markers, and how do I pace myself and kind of build in some resiliency and well-being along that journey. So it's this idea of self-created goal milestones along the way.
Yeah, Brian, that is just so wonderful. I love how this is happening. And the fact that, you point out that 20 years ago, it was just the C-suite people, the executives, the corporate the dean type folks who got the coach. That
Mm,
get the big job. Part of your contract is I signed on and I got this highfalutin coach, and it's only for those upper level people. And so I often wonder myself, like, how has this come through, this idea of a coaching mindset and the value of coaching, and that what we bring as coaches in terms of that co-thinking and partnering with people to be thought partners and being curious and non-judgmental. You wonder how that goes to the culture and how that has uptake. So I am curious myself where that's coming from. Like, where are they hearing that? How does that go through the interwebs? Like, where do people start learning about things that it filters down? So that was kind of my first question when you started talking about that.
mm,
And I loved how you point out with this first theme of the whole now what, that whole rediscovering themselves when you're so used to uh, metrics and competencies and setting out on a curriculum and an agenda and dot and T's and crossing I's, how we do. And then,
yeah,
and then, yeah, then you're left with the whole big, yeah. What do you mean no one's going to tell me what to do? What do you mean there's no curriculum? What do you mean there's no list of stuff I have to do? Now I do my own stuff. What do I do?
yeah,
And then you're right. You spin around like, well, what do I want to do? And then that's a
yeah.
big, I don't know. What can I do? I don't know what I don't know. How do I figure it out? So yeah.
Yeah. I think you're touching on that. Some of the questions you just raised, Kim, actually kind of touch on the other theme that I hear. One of the other themes, which is like, where's my validation? Like, am I doing a good job? Am I worthy of being a doctor? Do I know enough? And I guess the thing I'm thinking about is, throughout training, the answers to these questions were readily provided by, a test score or an observed evaluation, or like something like, and we, as medical trainees, are highly motivated by these external assessments, and we're conditioned to receive affirmation from them. But now these, yeah, clearly there's still like performance measures when you come out and you're a new physician, like, there's billing numbers and patient satisfaction scores and other quality metrics, et cetera. But they lack the sort of timeliness and maybe the clarity of a, like, kind of a good old standardized test score.
Right.
Um, and then I think a lot of people come out of training, and they start to realize, like, they have little control over some of the performance metrics that they have now, compared to when they had the control of studying for an exam. And so now they don't know if they're doing a good job, and I'm not sure that we, as employers or people that are developing our new juniors, give them a clear sense of, like, what is a good job in this circumstance.
Yeah.
So sometimes as a coach, like, you start to just raise their awareness about, like, what are the sources of self-worth that you are finding or seeking. And then similar to the other comment I made about like establishing these internally derived goals, it's really asking them like what is some internally derived definitions of success that might help like free you from other people's expectations.
Mm.
And then once people gain a little clarity around that, they can start to ask for feedback that aligns with. They can get really clear with whoever it is they're trying to get feedback from, when they're designing their relationship with their superiors or what have you. They can get really clear about their needs in terms of what they want in terms of feedback.
Yeah,
So that's another thing. The first question was like, now what? And then the second theme I guess I was hearing is like, okay, where's my validation now? You know?
exactly. Well, so along those lines, then, when you just said you kind of start with, oh, what does success mean for you? And you raise awareness about that, in sense of locus of control, if you will, an internal locus of control. Kim, you tell me, what does success mean for you? You tell me, how do you have a sense of meaning and purpose? What do you do, Brian, when you find that it seems to me, and what I'm seeing is this social comparison is a little bit off kilter. So if I were to say, you're saying to Kim, well, you tell me, what does success mean for you? I immediately would go to someone I admire and go, well, I have to have 3 R01s, and I have to be generating our RVUs like crazy, and I have to be teaching, and I have to get in good evaluations, I have to be on all the committees, and I have to be writing papers left and right. And
Mm,
that's what success means to me. And
yeah,
so this kind of sense of, oh my gosh, I've been here a whole 3 months. I don't feel like I'm on track. What do
yeah,
you do with someone like me who the social comparison is maybe misaligned, or I'm comparing myself, my insides to other people's outsides,
yeah.
falling short without recognizing, how do you help people calibrate that success?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. One of the first things that comes to mind when people are in that mode of telling themselves like I should do this, I should do that, and one mechanism as a coach is to just like question like what's important about that to you, and the important part of that question is the to you. So there are many things that other people are doing that are highly aligned with their values or skill set or their carefully thought out career goals. And we may not have had the awareness to examine like why am I doing some of the things I'm doing. So when you start saying to someone what's important about that to you, and then they answer you, and then you peel back the onion even further and say, well, what's important about that to you? Then as you do that maybe 3 or 4 times, you start to uncover, well, okay, well, maybe that's not all that important to you to pursue an R01. And that's not something that, you're telling yourself perhaps, or you've been told that that's something you need to be doing. But the truth is that's actually not important to you. And so your energy might be better spent in the areas that
Mm.
are important to you. So again, it's this kind of constant, I want to say challenging, but like this constant process of inquiry to uncover what may already be there. They just need a little bit of help, sort of understanding like what is important to me. What's my value here?
So, Dr. Brian Clyne, how do you position yourself in relationship to the early career faculty member, these early career physicians who obviously, super motivated, overachieving, type A, perfect, perfectionistic, and they are hard driving, and they do, you go down the lines, the why, and you're draining that bucket, and they're like, well, because if I want to be successful, I have to get an R01. Well, why is that important
Mm,
now? Because I want to be successful. Why do you want to be successful? Because that's my mentors expected that of me, and my dad was a dean, and I spent a lot of time and money. And then, well, why is it important to be dean? Because I want to make a bigger impact. And they do. You see, and they see in themselves this need, this desire, these goals that are very ambitious. How do you help them pace that? Because that's what I feel sometimes at a loss, that when I'm coaching, they want to do all of it now,
mm,
and they
yeah,
want to be a leader, and they're they're just kind of stacking, stacking, stacking because they're so used to that, as you pointed out earlier. They're used to that pace of med school and residency and fellowship where you're just bum, 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 bum. Everything's so fast, so fast, so intense, so hard,
Mm,
hard driving. And then they get in this the real job, and like you said, they're kind of adrift.
mm.
How do you help your clients kind of settle and take a beat to, you know, gauge culture and the nuances of their institution or their department or the division? How do you help, them see themselves as a Venn diagram in their micro or macro environment? Am I making any sense to you? I mean,
Yeah,
kind of
no,
like,
it's a great question because the phrase how do you get them to see themselves is a great way to summarize that. Um, I think to address some of what you said, I was thinking about the process of prioritization
mm,
and there. So one of the questions that I often ask to like you said, people who have there's lots of things that they could do. Like we could all do a million things. I could be out there learning German right now, or I could be aspiring to be a better I don't know, athlete or whatever it may be. But what are the things that I should do
mm,
is the question. And that should um, usually has to align with some really core value or a goal that you've established.
mm,
And um, so that process of prioritization about like kind of what's the barometer for the things that I'm going to spend my time on today, like right now. And so one question that I find useful is like, given all the things in front of you, the landscape of opportunity and potentially distracting, shining things, what's the one thing that you could do right now that's going to move you closer to the goal or the value that you're feeling most aligned with?
mm,
Um, so that's a process of working with people through inquiry to get them to think about prioritization and what they value. Because a lot of times, we get confounded by, why can't I just sit down and find the time to do that thing?
yeah.
That book that I know that I want to write it. Well, many times it's because there's a value that's competing for that time, and we haven't really acknowledged that it's simply a matter of finite, hours in the day. And we've made a choice. We make a choice in every moment of our lives to do one thing over another. And most of the time we're missing out on a million and one things because we've chosen to do the one thing. I think accepting the fact that there are going to be some things that you could do, but maybe shouldn't because it's not going to meet your bigger objectives. And it also gives people an opportunity to just get like really clear about the things that are important in their lives. So I was getting to the idea of like, why can't I seem to do that thing? And I get frustrated with myself when I can't find the time to do it. Well, you've chosen to do something else that arguably is more. So listening to yourself in those moments and saying like, what did I do instead of sitting down to write that book? Maybe that's the important thing that I should be pursuing here.
Mm, mm. So it sounds like you're saying a little bit of patience, a little mercy, a little grace that I'm seeing this both ways because maybe the honesty, if you're asking me to say, well, Kim, think very carefully. I mean, you say you want this book, but were you doing in its place? So if I'm honest, I might say, well, I was, in email in the rabbit holes of email instead, or I was shopping online, or I was in, text exchanges or like nonsense things that are like time wasting. That might be an honest gut check to go, okay, well, if frankly, I am wasting time, maybe, and why am I wasting time? Because I'm afraid I'm not going to be successful, or I don't know where to start, or I'm overwhelmed by it. But then the other side is that interrogating that, geez, you're right, Brian. Like, why didn't I do that? Well, because there was an emergency, there were priorities, urgent priorities that I had to, my patient this, my
Yeah,
mentees that. And so then I'd be like, well, geez, what was I going to do? I'll ignore the patient, ignore the mentee, ignore my early career faculty, ignore my boss? Certainly not. So there's kind of two
right.
ways that that gut check, that honesty will lead you to kind of maybe come to terms with, okay, how do I feel about that? And that's a legit thing. I think I made a right choice at the right time to, yeah, deal with what my boss wanted me to do. Or actually, I could do better at limiting the time I spend doing email
Yeah.
or doing things. So,
And sometimes the question could be, okay, so you chose to, go take care of that patient or family member or whatever the circumstance instead of doing the thing that you said was important. Well, what was wrong with that? There's,
yeah,
and would you do the same thing again? Well, yeah, I probably would go take care of my family member or respond to that sick patient because that suddenly came the priority. And that was in that moment, like, what's the most important thing right now for me to move forward with an objective or meet a value where I need to. That's the question in the moment. And so sometimes it's like, well, there was nothing, there's no reason to beat yourself up, but just be aware that you chose it and it was the right decision for you at that time.
yeah. Well, so Brian, so now I'm going to kind of play this forward because you've talked about a couple of themes, the whole thing of like, now what? I feel like maybe anomie or normlessness or lawlessness. I'm kind of adrift here. And then not only might I be adrift, but then I have no objective sense of validating. Am I doing a good job here? They're paying me, so I must be doing all right. But gosh, is this going to be enough to get me ahead in life? But how do you deal and how do you coach faculty members who have fear, are afraid of making the wrong decision? Yeah, Brian, this sounds right. Be a little, merciful to myself, and we all make choices, but am I getting into the habit of making bad decisions? What if I'm making a mistake? What if my doing this is not long term going to serve me well? And yeah, that is part of my core value to be helpful and be collaborative, but long term, will this kind of behavior help me or hurt me? How do you coach around fear? I guess is what I'm kind of getting at of like, I guess I'm going to do it, but they're afraid that what if I make a mistake?
Yeah, yeah. Fear of maybe I took the wrong path or the wrong opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess some of the things I think about, like, what can we control and what we can't control, right? I think one question for me would come up for me would be around, like, well, how will you know when you've made the right decision or the wrong decision? And for most people, they will say, like, the right decision feels, resonant with the things that are important to me, and the wrong decision doesn't. That's a kind of a very visceral way of, saying I've made decisions that are aligned with my values. Um, Other people will say, like, there's a strategic. I had this conversation with some faculty members recently, some new faculty members who we were going over the promotion criteria for our institution, and to go from assistant to associate tends to be kind of the biggest leap for most people, and it takes the longest period of time. And so I talked to several of them about, like, their activities and how they're spending their time now. And some of them are like, I really enjoy doing X activity. How does it all fit in with these, like, fairly, like, strategic, metrics that I need to start chipping away at over the next, whatever, maybe 6, 8, 9 years?
Yeah.
And the truth is, sometimes they don't. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, like, okay, should I continue to do that thing? I'll just give an example. Like, I'm someone whose core identity is as, like, a simulation educator, and yet I'm being pulled into some kind of, like, an ultrasound project, and like an emergency ultrasound project, and I love it. I love the people I'm working with. I love maybe it's not going to generate a lot of scholarship, but it's just like, it's something that I find so rewarding. And so I say, listen, it doesn't line up with this. If you take a strategic approach, and if promotion was the most important thing to you, and that's the milestone, then you might consider shedding the ultrasound thing. But it sounds like you really love it. So I would say, stick with it and acknowledge that you've made a trade-off decision, and it may take you a little bit longer to get promoted, and you may not generate as much scholarship from that activity, but but guess what? It's going to provide you with a counterbalance to, some of the career burnout things that people experience if you're doing things that you truly love. Now, the ideal situation is you're doing things you truly love, and they're connected to all the metrics that you have to deal with for promotion. But that's not always the case. And sometimes it just takes a conversation with someone to point out that, like, all your stuff is over here and your goal is to do this. How does this fit in? And because this is how you're spending your time, and just pointing that out to you, and do with it what you will, maybe, from a non-directive standpoint. But so that, I don't know if that's.
That's great. I mean, you're helping me just kind of reflect on the past couple conversations I've been having, where particularly early career faculty members are in this kind of between the rock and the hard place of feeling like they've been voluntold to do something, so it's not even an option to say no to something. It kind of sounds like it, hey, I'd love you to teach this course or take over, running the program, for this and that. And that kind of, we trained in our leadership programs, saying no, no is a complete sentence. And if you're saying yes to everything, you're saying no to important things. And we kind of have all these mantras. But when it comes right down to brass tacks, when, your division director or your department chair is asking you to do something, a lot of times people will feel like, this is not aligned with my values. This is not along my pathway. It does not bring me joy. I feel like I have to do it.
Yeah.
So how do we coach and how do we make sense of that reality that sometimes we're going to have to do things in the seasons of life that are not very palatable, but how do you work around that? How do you help people understand those decision points in life?
Yeah, no, it's a great example, and it comes up a lot, because let's face it, there's a fair amount of hierarchy in our work environments and healthcare. I guess two things came up for me as you were talking about that, and they're very specific situations, and they have less to do with abstract things like values, and they're very concrete. One is to, if you're someone who has done the exercise of really looking at how you spend your time and accounting for it, and you can, like, objectively tell your boss, like, I do not have the time, and I can prove it. So I don't see how this fits in. And by the way, it's not aligned with some of my long-term career goals. And the second thing that I've used is saying, well, I could take that on, but realize that it's not something that I want to do. And I'm doing other work on behalf of the department or the organization. What do you want me to give up? What of the other important things I'm doing for you right now, what should I set aside, because this is again, objectively not going to fit on my plate. But I realize that's a tough situation.
It is. I think one of the beautiful things about coaching is just, and having, in addition to mentoring and sponsorship, is just the ability to have time to sit down with someone. And it's sometimes not even, I realize, finally realizing it's not what I would say, but just being in communion with someone else who is focused on you and hearing you. And sometimes it's just, I've seen them when faculty members hear themselves talking, and they have that kind of aha moment of someone looking at them and asking them, well, tell me more about that, or why do you think that's good? And what does that look like to you? Those kind of moments are just so organic, and it happens just because we carve time out. And to me, the lesson is always, you figure this out yourself. I'm just kind of along for the ride here. You know this, you've got this, you have a sensibility about this. I'm watching you, and you lit up like a Christmas tree when you were talking about teaching. And when you started talking about that grant application, your whole body kind of got wah, wah, wah. And they say, I did. I'm like, oh, I wish I had recorded this, because so that, what I love what you're saying is, Brian, is just this, again, the awareness, the kind of like, we're so used to not being aware because we're going so fast, so
Mm,
hard all the time that we don't even recognize that when we're hungry or we're sleepy or we're tired. So certainly we don't not even aware of basic bodily needs. How many of us are aware of what our hearts and our minds are aligned and thinking? So it's the time
yeah.
with someone like you is so precious because it's just that kind of connecting back to who am I? What am I doing here? What do I care about? And that may
Yeah.
change over time. I think as you mentioned, earlier, the seasons of life that, yeah, 10 years ago that's great, but gosh, you had no idea 10 years ago that you'd be here, right? That life
Yeah.
would be completely a 180 and you've got a whole bunch of kids now and you're all who knew? And so it's perfectly normal to rethink, revisit these goals and these plans that we have.
I totally agree with you about this, the experience of, being coached and having a coach. Like the gift of coaching is having someone who is like fully dialed in and listening at all levels
Mm,
to you. I mean, when in our lives, Kim, do we have someone sit with us for, an hour uninterrupted and just thoroughly listen to us?
never,
Um,
never.
yeah, and if you hear, like, what's the most common, people, complain about their job, or like leave an organization. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel acknowledged.
Feel
And
valued.
like, coaching is all about, like, listening at this really deep level.
Yeah. Even with our
So that,
mentors, we're with our mentors and 99.9% of us, we're multitasking as I'm mentoring someone. We're on Zoom, we're checking emails, we're checking our phone, we're making we're really because we're in the mentor role. That's what we do. We're faculty, we're mentoring, we're sponsoring, we're advising, we're teaching, we're doing all these things. But when you have that coach hat on, it's your back is to the computer, or if you're zooming with somebody, everything else is off. It's it is intentional, and that is never happens. Even with the best of mentors, I challenge even the best of us when we're mentoring, it's hard to be in that coaching mindset. But I know you had another theme that I'm curious, what else are you seeing and what commonalities are you seeing with your coaching
yeah,
background?
I guess the third point I wanted to bring up, it does connect to something you mentioned a moment ago, or which was like they're not even aware in some cases of who they are. I think I'm just paraphrasing what you said before, but it's this whole idea of, doctors, they spend so much of their young adulthood, a time when many others are learning who they are as a person, and they're preparing to become a physician, and they have this really strong sense of identity around being a physician. And then, as I say, we kind of spit them out the other side. And it becomes hard to figure out, like, who am I really? Like, what is my true self, separate from my identity as a physician? And of course they get told, well, what are your hobbies? What are your interests? This has got to be a sustainable career. What are the things you do outside of medicine? What are your passions? And they're like,
Right,
I haven't had time to develop passion. I've been
right.
like, my head's been down grinding for like the last 10 years. And that's a theme that I've heard repeatedly among new people just out of training. They're like, okay, now I've got to have hobbies. And that's almost becomes like, it takes on a life of its own. Cause like, of course we're all very responsive to tasks. They're like, okay,
Oh, I have to get a hobby.
I'm gonna go home and find my list of my five passions in life, and suddenly it's very unorganic. So that I've encountered that more than once, and sometimes it takes some time. I mean, oftentimes we talk about coaching being present and forward looking, and not necessarily backward looking. But
Mhm.
but I do an exercise around, like, visualizing experiences where people were at their best selves,
Mm.
and kind of drawing upon those experiences and say, like, what was it about that, you weren't a physician perhaps at that time, or what was it about that experience that really felt important. Or then I'll do another exercise around kind of visioning again, around like their future selves, to kind of get them to connect with things outside of, like, wearing the white coat and taking care of patients or doing research or whatever it is they do in their medical role. Really exploring that, because we want people to, we talk a lot about, building resilience and having these other anchors in our lives. And I think if people have a more clear sense of that, then they're more likely to, stay in medicine and have some, to be more engaged and to have some longevity. But that's, I guess, to summarize, the other theme is this question of like, who am I really? And that becomes a topic of discussion for many new physicians.
Oh, Brian, I love that whole identity formation. And I see that playing out as a gerontologist, as you know, looking at in our later or advanced career faculty members who then had spent, 30,
Mm,
40 plus years, sole identity is surgeon, investigator, educator at
mm,
fill in the blank university. And that is the master status, if you will. I have no other identity. It's my primary identity. I am nothing if I am not this. And
yeah.
that risk of being, the pie being completely 99.9% wedged off into I am a professor. I am my role or my title. I am a dean, I'm a chair, leaves nothing for the other, as you said earlier, the onion layers of ourselves. And then when it gets time, as it will, God willing, when we don't have to be working or maybe shouldn't be, or our family don't want us to be working full time, how do we find identity and purpose and meaning and build community outside of the ivory
Mm,
tower? If our whole identity, our whole lives has been this,
yeah.
who are we?
Yeah.
Awareness of who we are, if not this. So what I love about what you're saying is, and again, you're cracking me up because you're going to go home and I guess I have to now throw axes. I have to start painting. I have to throw pottery because that's what I have to do now.
Yeah.
But remembering when I was a kid, what did I like to do? I love being on my bicycle, or I love, singing or playing the guitar. And someday I'm going to get back to that. Well, why not make someday now? Because if it's all work and no play, uh, now I'm thinking of that whole saying, avoid boring people in both senses of the word. Avoid boring people and avoid
Yeah.
boring,
I love
right?
that.
So we have to have like depth. And so that's what I really, really love, this awareness of who we are in identity formation, because gosh, I have so many faculty members who are advanced career who are like, they're like,
Yeah.
similar to early career, they're like, now what? I'm
Yeah.
still 60 plus years old, or I'm 70 plus years old. Now what do I do? How can I can't not work. I have got no life outside of this. What?
Yeah. And there's a real, in some ways, there's a real safety there because it's what we know and it's how we've presented ourselves, and it can be very, yeah, it can just feel very scary. I think risky to put yourself out there in a different way or say I'm something else. It can be really hard. Yeah.
That's what coaching is, and it gives us that again, that space of exploring these elements and these components and these layers of ourselves. And it's nice to talk about this. And I'm sure some people are listening to this going la la la. Right? Have you forgotten what it's like to be under, the thumb of the way funds flow and financial transformations and compensation plans, and how everything is just so intense, so
Yeah.
intense right now to speak like, yeah, get a coach, have a hobby, and do some fun stuff when when so many of us are in this thick of, yeah, easy for you to say, but I need to meet these targets because otherwise I will not be able to pay my bills. I will not be able to realize my reason for being here. So I get that it's
Yeah.
tough, it's challenging, and it's not a but, as you've been saying, you're so good about saying and it's how can we find, and maybe it's not happening now, maybe at this moment of your life, when, to put in simplistic terms, when the grant's due on Monday, yeah, maybe you're not whipping some axes around this weekend and having, going for a bike ride. This weekend you're working on the grant. So maybe this period or season of your life, yeah, you're going to be, grinding.
Yeah.
And if you build in that time, like we build vacations of taking the pause moments to
Mm.
recalibrate, recenter, revisit, the pulse check kind of a thing. What do you think?
I mean, I have to acknowledge, yeah, people are under really like they're under real constraints, and there's issues of a lot, financial security, health. There's so many things that I don't want to seem flippant with these things. But in most situations, I guess one of the questions I sometimes ask is like, what am I telling myself about this right now? And particularly around like, what do I have control over and what don't I have control over? And oftentimes when I stop and pause or pose that question, people start to realize that they have more control over things than they might have been telling themselves previously. And I don't want to deny that like people are under real deadlines and real stressors, and there's limitations for sure. But I think sometimes stopping to ask that question, like in this particular situation, what do I have control over, is just in and of itself, I think, a mechanism for pausing, stepping back, and even taking back some control.
Love it. What control? What stories am I telling myself? I just wrote that down. What stories am I telling myself?
I think that's the ultimate like tool for self-awareness, right? Is like, what am I telling myself right now, and how is it serving me, and is it true? Is it outdated? Is it accurate? And how can I be sure? And all those things we don't. I mean, that's one of the things I think coaching does. Is it helps uncover this awareness.
Dr. Brian Clyne. So you see why he's a frequent flyer here. You see why his first episode, I'm telling you, episode number 191, go check it out. You can reach Dr. Brian Clyne at Brian, BRIAN Clyne, CLYNE, at brownphysicians.org. That's one word, brownphysicians.org. Or go to the website, go to facultyfactory.org and click on his profile, read all about him. And I'm going to put all the links and everything there. Brian, as usual, I love talking with you. You are good food for the soul. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for doing this and for thinking about these things and for being on the podcast. I'll leave you the final peace out.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and I was so thrilled to be invited back and to be part of this incredible movement that you've created, Kim. So thank you to you.
Hi, Faculty Factory friends. It's Kim Skorupski here. Just a quick commercial for our upcoming Faculty Leadership Collaborative Mid-Career Bootcamp. We're hot off the 3-day Faculty Leadership Collaborative Early Career Bootcamp, where we had about 72 assistant professors from around the country and the world. Speakers included Drs. Susan Chubinskaya, Nutan Vaidya, Valerie Williams, Bob Tillman, Karma Fouché, Rachel Levine, Hannah Lundberg, Jennifer Haythornthwaite, Susan Matulavicius, Sonali Kandowal, and Kathleen Gamilla Crudo, Josh Polanski, and me. It was so awesome. Well, the 3-day mid-career bootcamp for associate professors is April 9th to 11th, 2025, 2 to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, all via Zoom. The topics for the mid-career bootcamp will include Leadership Presence and Self-Management by Joe Losey at Pitt, Communicating with Emotional Intelligence with Alice Fornari from Hofstra, Leading Organizational Change with Susan Chubinskaya right here at University of Texas Medical Branch, Conflict Management and Mediation with Dave Usum from Hopkins, Strategic Thinking, Planning, and Negotiating with Rejma Jagzi from Emory, Building and Managing Teams and Projects with Wendy Bennett from Hopkins and Darpan Patel from the University of Texas Medical Branch, Finances and Funds Flow with Vin Pellegrini from Dartmouth, and Creating a Leadership Future, Preparing for Transitions with Archana Chatterjee from Rosalind Franklin. We're also going to have a panel of recently promoted professors who will share their journeys. You'll get 9 contact hours of CME, CNE, and CLS continuing education credits. You've got a curated resource guide, lots of networking opportunities. We have a half hour before, half hour after each day's events for just more community building and networking and Q&A. So go to the facultyfactory.org website. That's facultyfactory.org website. You'll find the link right there on the first page to sign up and share it with your colleagues and friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Faculty Factory podcast. We are a faculty development community sharing tools to build academic leaders in healthcare. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast? Please visit facultyfactory.org/contact and send me a message there. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Affairs. at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas.